Henri talked to us on hermeneutics many years ago, doing a course in hermeneutics, and I remember having the experience of looking out and seeing the world, and being then unsure whether it was the world I was seeing or the contents of my own mind. I'm still not quite sure. But anyway, we're going to hear about phenomenology of perception from Henri Bortoft now. Henri.
Thank you. As you all know here, over the last few decades, there's been a tremendous growth of interest in alternative modes of reality, different kinds of perception, different ways of seeing. People in the Western world have become aware of quite different approaches to reality that other people have had at different times and do have today in different places. So you get this kind of multi-dimensional perspective on the possibilities of reality and the different modes of perception which there are. I'm sure everyone in this room is actually very familiar with this kind of thing. In fact, most of you will be very much more familiar with it than I am, because I'm not an alternative person, I'm rather prosaic. But one of the things which sometimes in all of this world of interest tends to get overlooked, possibly, is the fact that in the 20th century, in fact throughout this century, there has been a considerable development in the Western world, which we now somewhat overlook, in understanding the nature of perception, and what is actually happening when we see the world. And this turns out to have a kind of a value for us that we might not immediately be aware of, because we can begin to understand from what's been discovered in our own Western world what is going on in our ordinary everyday experience. And we discover thereby that what's actually taking place as we are here at this moment, for example, is not quite what we think it is. And if we can see more clearly, or come to catch a glimpse of what it is more really like, this gives us a certain degree of freedom in our own lives with regard to ourselves and our relationships with other people at all levels, that is really well worth the having. And we have this possibility there in our world. We don't have to go and find it somewhere else. We can also begin to understand how there can really be alternative realities and so on from this same movement. So I'm going to talk about this in a really very ordinary way. I said that this has grown during this century, and really since the mid-century people have become very much more aware of it. A lot of work has been done in Western psychology, and a lot of this work was done after the 1940s, 50s and so on, especially in America. What happened there was simply that money became available for this kind of work, so it was jobs for the boys, the academics got in, because people started to do things like fly aeroplanes at very high speeds, jet planes. And when they did that, they did things like fly them into mountains, which they didn't see were there. And eventually, because this became a matter of sort of the armaments and big business and so on, they began to realise that they needed to investigate the psychology of perception, because it's something really wrong when a pilot didn't see a mountain when there was one right in front of him. And then a lot of this work began to really develop. And a lot of people think that the whole thing actually came out of this research in America, but it didn't. Because if you look at this American research and you trace through the development, you'll see that the ideas upon which we're based were actually brought to America by Germans fleeing from the Nazis and so on and that. And it's all there in this European tradition, developed earlier on in this century, and even in the last century and so on and that, but particularly earlier in this century. Gestalt psychology would be familiar to all of you, and this was a major influence. But that was also very closely tied in with the philosophical development of phenomenology and Husserl that I'm going to talk about today. A number of these movements came together and were then sort of exported into the New World and so on, where they naturally thought it had actually begun. So what I'm talking about really goes back to the beginning of kind of understanding that's developed during this century and is really very fundamental. It's simply concerned with seeing the world. What happens as we are now, just seeing what there is about us. What is actually happening in this moment of seeing? What is happening in the moment of seeing, in the event of seeing? Well, that's where our difficulty begins, isn't it? Because what we're aware of is the seen, the what has been seen. It's all over before we catch up with it, as it were. Because we are actually involved in this process. We are part of this process of perception. So really, as we start out, what we're trying to look at today is already finished. So we deal with that which is already seen and try to reconstruct it from there. And that's like trying to get to the milk by way of the cheese. You will actually be led into a number of misconceptions by doing that. We have to find some way of getting in to the moment of perception itself. And this, there are many ways of approaching this, but one way which has been found useful is to look for cases where it breaks down, where the smooth process of perception, which normally takes place in the blink of an eyelid, because everything I'm talking about this morning, you realise, is all over in the blink of an eyelid. We've got to get into that blink. That's our problem. We look for cases where it breaks down, where the smoothly running process of perception stops in midway, as it were, gets held up, something disrupts it, there's a hiatus. So we look for some breakdown situation, because then from that, by, as it were, stopping it in mid-process, there is revealed that which is normally hidden in the smooth flow of the process itself. And this has been a way of working which people have found to be very fruitful and will not be unfamiliar to you. And I'm going to start off by putting up a picture on the screen. Some sort of picture, if I can find it. Now, there's a button here. I know there's a button. Yes. Good. Step one has been successfully completed. And now, what comes next? Now there'll be a focusing device, which is bound to be somewhere. Oh, did you see that? That's cheating. I hope you can all see. Sorry for those of you at the very edge. You might like to move, just stand somewhere temporarily. I don't want to embarrass you by asking you to move. But it will be helpful for you. Now, when that kind of picture is put up in front of people, reactions are usually quite mixed. People see, for the most part, a sort of collection of random black marks on white, or you can see a collection of random white marks, some people do, but most it's fairly clear that it's random black marks, and it's enclosed in a circle. I don't really know why. And they look at that and they can't, they're a little bit puzzled, they wonder what on earth is going on. And sometimes people see something more. Now so that's the immediate perception, it's just these black and white marks which seem to be higgledy-piggledy. But if I say, well, there is there the head of a giraffe.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah! I got it.
Now oh yeah, that's what the whole of this morning, my input today is about. What happens in that instant? Oh yeah, I see. I see. What's the difference between before that and, well, after that? What is the bit that happens in that instant when you say, I see the head of a giraffe? And of course, there will be people in the room at the moment who don't see the head of a giraffe. I think there'll probably still be some. Is there anyone? Francis! I would not have thought it of you. Well, if I get out of the way, it's here. it's, well, I can't see it, you see. It's sort of here. The head comes up here, and there's the horns that the giraffe has. They're sort of really tough, so we won't go into the details of the giraffe anatomy. And then the head comes down here like that. Got it. Now that's the point. What happens when we get it? What's the difference between before we got it and after we got it? Because quite clearly, when we see the head of the giraffe, then we're seeing something more than we saw when we just saw random black and white marks. And yet it's very interesting, because if we consider the case of like someone like Francis, who didn't immediately see, or even after a while, see the giraffe, if we ask, well, what's the difference between someone who can see it and someone who can't see it? I think it's very clear that the difference does not lie in their eyes. We were talking about that aspect of things earlier this morning, the question of actual vision. But this is not a question of vision in that sense at all, is it? Because nobody supposes for a moment that there's anything defective in Francis's eyes which held him up from actually seeing the giraffe. And we see that for ourselves. It's not. Therefore, what that means is that when we actually see the giraffe, we're seeing something more than when we just see the black and white blotches. But that something more, which we are seeing apparently with our eyes, we cannot be seeing with our eyes, because we did not see it there before, and yet nothing has actually changed. You know, what we have, first of all, before we actually see it, we would have what I would call a visual experience. Which is a sense experience. And that's what we have when we just see the blotches. We have a little bit more than that, actually, but we won't. I will be a bit, have to make some simplification here. And then it changes, and we see something more, and we say, we see it there. Yet, where was it when we didn't see it? And there's nothing wrong with our eyes. So what this shows us here, it's a very simple thing, is that there is more to seeing than meets the eye. And that's how we usually think of seeing, isn't it? You see, it's very simple. It's a lovely view down there. I close my eyes, and I open them, and what meets my eye, the light, produces the seeing. So we usually think that seeing is just a matter of what meets our eyes. That's the way we have been brought up to think. That's the story, that the simple story that we have to some extent all been told various ways. You open your eyes, and what meets them is then what you see. But in this case, we discover that there's more to it than that. There's another factor. And this other factor, interestingly, can't actually be a sensory factor. Because if it were, it would mean that when we didn't see the giraffe, there was a bit that we missed out. Some of the blobs or something we didn't see in the first time. That would be a defective eyesight. There's another example here which I want to turn to. And, oh, no, yes, I know what I'll do. I don't know if you're able to see this, perhaps. I'll stick this. Yeah, I'll put it this way. Get rid of the giraffe. Now, this is a very famous one. And this is... Oh, that's clever.
There is something.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is a very famous one, which many of you will have seen before. This one has the difficulty that with the giraffe, it's rather interesting. I'll go back to it in a minute. For a time at least, when you first see the giraffe, you can actually see it and not see it. You can go back to not seeing it. You may have noticed, I should have mentioned that, you may have noticed that. You can actually go back to not seeing it and then seeing it. And this actually helps one to get the sense that we are actually doing something here, something which escapes from us normally because we think it's all being done to us. But we are actually doing something. Now with this one, which is the famous one, you can't do that. People find that either they can't see it, and some really can't see it, and when you can see it, you can't not see it again. It's that kind of quality. And the giraffe was actually designed by my wife, as they say, quite accidentally, I suppose. I was going off one day somewhere, and Saturday I had to go and give a talk somewhere, I suppose on this kind of thing. And I was saying to her, the problem with this thing is, it did what I've just said. When people can see it, then they can't not see it. Now, it was over breakfast, and I was saying, what it needs something that's got a more open kind of texture to it. Anyway, then off went. I got back well after midnight. She gone to bed, and there in the kitchen table there was this giraffe. You see, and it was fantastic. So I said to her, I said, "Oh, when did you do that?" She said, "Well, I didn't. I just thought of it, and so I just did it. So it's quite marvellous, really." So I like to tell that story because it's very, very useful advice. This one also has its own uses. Let's look at this collection here of random black and white blotches. And this really is very random, as you can see. Now, some people immediately see something here very directly, and it's quite a shock, and that's that. Other people don't see it at all, and even when I'm telling them what it is, still can't see it. But there is there the head of a man who is looking at you. And it's a sort of medieval, well, it's easy now. People used to say this is like medieval depictions of the head of Christ. Now we can say it's Che Guevara.
Che Guevara.
Oh, I'm sorry. Che Guevara.
I cannot see it actually. I'm trying to focus on help it.
It is, in fact, it's astonishingly, entirely accidentally. I wonder if it is. Maybe that famous poster was taken from this. Because there, you have, it cuts off there, there are the eyes.
Yes,
Oh my God.
Now, what I want to know is what actually happens in that moment. Because that's the seeing. That's what we're concerned with here. And here, for those who can't, and many of you won't be able to get, it's very, very hairy and beardy, like Che Guevara. And there it is. Who can't see it? So, but I can give a help here. I've got a thing that spoils it all. If I can handle the technology, I've got a thing that spoils it all. Let's do it this way. There we are. You see that? Now back to that. So, the difference is very, very striking here. Incidentally, what this is supposed to be, now this is a story maybe true or not, but it's a nice story. This is actually an aerial photograph of mountains with snow. And the photographer who took this, was his job, he was developing this in his darkroom that night. And you know that when a print is formed in the darkroom, it appears slowly, it emerges. And he is developed doing this, and the print emerges, and he sees the head of Christ looking straight at him, and was immediately converted to Christianity. This does tell you something about the dynamics of conversion. Yes. But what we have to see is, as with the giraffe and here with the head, what is this extra factor which comes in, which turns what I would call just sense perception, which is what we had first, turns it into what I'm going to call cognitive perception. And I hope there aren't any professional philosophers here, because they'll then start to say I'm mixing my terminology, which I am, but I found that this works best for people. What we're really concerned with in seeing the world is not, in fact, sense perception. Yes, our eyes have to be involved, or whatever the sense organ is. If I don't open my eyes, I don't see. That's very clear. But that's only the sensory part, and we think the whole story is told by the sense perception aspect. What this kind of thing shows us is that there's another factor which is not a sensory factor at all, but which in our experience, we would believe everything was given to the senses. We're not able to tell the difference between the sensory and the non-sensory aspect of cognitive perception. Why I call it cognitive perception is because we're talking here about that kind of seeing which is knowing, which is recognizing. I see a video camera. I don't have an experience. Oh, I mustn't look at that. I have an experience. I don't have an experience, then try to figure out what it is. I just see a video camera. That's what I mean by cognitive, because I recognize in the experience what it is. So this is a form of knowing. We see the world knowingly. The world, we actually, in seeing it, we know it. We recognize it. And that's the kind of perception that we're actually interested in, because that's what happens in seeing the world. So what is this extra non-sensory factor which has to come into operation for us to actually have the experience of I see? And we can use various terms for this, but somehow, well, obviously, one thing that happens is, first of all, it has a kind of, whatever it is, it's an organising factor or a structuring factor. Because what before had been random and without any structure or organisation at all, now does have an organisation to it. I mean, think of the giraffe. There it is. There, this is something which is very, very blotchy and random. Then when you see the giraffe, it becomes organised or structured, because you see some of the blotches belong to the giraffe and some don't. And of those which do, you see which part of the giraffe they belong to. So this field of what had been a purely visual experience is now organised and structured. And so we have to ask the question, what is this extra non-sensory organising, structuring factor which turns sense perception into cognitive perception, but which we're not aware of and mistakenly think is all part of the sense perception? And it is simply, he said, the idea or the concept. Now, different people use different terms. I quite like the word concept because of its connection with conception and birth, conceiving, and it's actually in the moment that the concept operates, we conceive it. But, so it's good from that point of view, but I still prefer to stick to the term idea, which has many disadvantages as well, because we think that ideas are something that we simply have in our mind. I have an idea, really. I have an idea and it's sitting there in my mind. You say, well, we're not talking about something like that. It's not a kind of mental picture or an image or anything like that at all. The idea is something active. And ideas, well, ideas are organising. I call it in the, I usually call it in the book I've written, which includes this, I call it the organising idea. To try to get across that ideas are organising. The word idea is a noun in English, so it makes it seem like an entity, a thing. There's nothing like that whatsoever. Absolutely nothing like that at all. See? Try to think of organising, pure organising, just organising. No thing which organises, but just organising. And that's more like what an idea is. Sometimes I used to say, well, it's like Alice in Wonderland, or Alice with the Looking Glass, I don't know which one it is, but the Cheshire Cat, which is grinning, and gradually disappears and leaves behind only its grin. Well, it's grinning. It couldn't leave behind the grin. It can leave, as it were, grinning. Imagine pure grinning. Now, supposing you can experience, sounds abstract, but supposing, in fact, you can experience grinning directly as such, well, that's what ideas are like, organising. If you could experience, and we can, sometimes, a pure organising, that's what ideas are like. So when I say there is an organising idea, the giraffe idea, which then transforms this from a sense perception to a cognitive perception, it's that kind of notion that I'm trying to get at, which is really quite hard for us, especially in an English language tradition where we do think of ideas as mental pictures or images which we have, as we say, in the mind, as if there was a space. And in that space there is an entity called an idea, like there might be bodies moving in physical space and so on. So we produce this sort of doubling of the world and so on, which the moment people start to go in to think about this and to think it through, they see it can't actually be like that at all. But we very strongly have this in the English language tradition. Now, the Europeans don't have it in the same way. For example, the philosopher Franz Brentano said this. That's okay. By idea, I mean the act of conceiving. The act of conceiving, not that which is conceived. It's all in the act of conceiving. Now Brentano is a very important man because he was the person who introduced this kind of thing into Western thinking. He's had a number of, he was in Austria, Vienna, in the last century, and he had a number of very famous students, do you call them today? People, what do you call them? Anyway, one of whom was Husserl, who actually went on to found the whole philosophy of phenomenology based on just this insight. Another was Frege, who actually went on to found the whole school of analytical philosophy. Another was Sigmund Freud, about whom we need to say no more. And another one was one or two, and I can't remember who it was, of the people who went on to found Gestalt psychology. And Gestalt psychology and phenomenology came, as it were, from the same root. And they carry with them the same new way of seeing in different forms. And it goes back to Brentano, who actually went back to the period of philosophy before the modern period, before Descartes and the beginning of modernism. He went back to the medieval period, to people like Aquinas and so on, who in turn have gone back to Aristotle, where, and you find there's a whole historical development of this way of thinking, which was then brought back into the Western world, from which it had been absent for about 300 years. So this was really, and it's from this that this movement actually began. So that's just, you don't need to know that, but that's just a bit of background about who Brentano was, because nobody's ever going to talk to you about him again. He was actually a very significant figure in terms of what he did and the influence that he had. By idea, I mean the act of conceiving, not that which is conceived. That's the organising idea. It's in the act. And that's really what happens with the giraffe. Because the thing with the giraffe is that we see the giraffe. If we ask, where is the giraffe? Where is it? Well, everyone will say, well, it's there. There it is. I mean, you all see the giraffe there now. Yeah. There you are. You all see it there, don't you? But it's not there. How could it be there when you didn't see it there before? Nothing has happened, nothing has changed. There's no giraffe on this screen. If I put the head of the man back, there's no head of the man on this screen. I put the head of the man back. We can't avoid seeing it there. It's there, I see, there it is. But it isn't there at all. Because it wasn't there when we couldn't see it, and it isn't there now we can see it. It just seems to us that it's there. It seems to us that it's there because that is where the sensory part of the experience originates from. And the seeing stops at the sensory. Where is the head of the man? Where is the giraffe? It's in the seeing. It's actually in the seeing which sees it. We must now begin to think of seeing in an active way. We tend to think of seeing, as I said, as something passive. Open your eyes and it happens. No, we must think of seeing as a kind of doing. We see the giraffe when we see it. Think of the second see as a doing. Seeing as doing. We see it. We see the giraffe when we see giraffely. And that is really very precisely what it is like. When we see giraffely, we see the giraffe because we see it. And where we see it is where the sensory part of the experience originates from, which is actually on the screen. And so as it were, that's where the seeing stops, where the sensory part is. But then we think it's all there. And we tell ourselves this story that seeing is just a matter of sense experience, because we're not aware of this, the action of this organising idea, which is brought into the experience in another kind of way. When you work with this quite a lot, and anyone can do this for themselves, then you get the sense that we're really all the time, we're actually living, or we're already living in another dimension. All the time. We actually inhabit another dimension. We're living in that, like an ocean. We're like fish swimming in the ocean. And we live in, I'll call this the ocean of mind. It's not a happy term, mind, but never mind. Sorry. But we are, it's as if we live in an ocean of mind as fish live in an ocean of water, or the birds live in the air, and so on. And we're simply not aware of that, as presumably we might argue that the fish are not aware of water. We might have, for example, philosophical fish who have discussions about this extraordinary proposition that someone has suggested, that they are actually surrounded by water, which no one can detect, and so on and that. So we can imagine a very similar kind of situation. In fact, that's what we do when we have these philosophical arguments and discussions in a similar kind of way. It's only when we get this kind of breakdown situation that this begins to become visible to us. And because this is happening all the time. Because you see, if I hold that up, what do you see?
Chalk.
A piece of chalk. Well, there it is. And you all just see a piece of chalk. And it just seems like a sense experience. Right? Just light rays from this enter your eye, register on the retina, do whatever they do in the brain, that's it. Purely visual experience, really, isn't it? Because I want you now to imagine holding this up in some other context. Let us say a society, well, let's make something slightly more interesting, a piece of chalk. Well, I don't know, pen? Yeah, pen. Imagine holding that up, some people in a culture who had no notion of a pen. No, well, you see, there's no such thing as an isolated concept. You don't have a pen on its own. Pen goes with paper, goes with writing, goes with the whole cultural organisation. Right. So it's context, but never mind. Imagine, therefore, a society, a culture which didn't have all of that, and you hold that up in front of such people. What will they see? Well, clearly they're going to see something. And they'll be puzzling, and they'll be trying to make it into something. They'll be trying to see it within their own context. They cannot possibly see what you and I are seeing now. But given this other story, which is the story of empiricism, that it's all just a matter of sense experience, then there'll be no difference between such people and ourselves when looking at this object. It would be the same, but it cannot be. Because the organising idea, the concept which we have, enables us to see that directly as pen. Yes?
Say, with regards to the image on the screen, is that not just the organisation of a recognised image, a learned image? If you've never seen a giraffe, then would you ever see that?
No, probably not. No, you're quite right. It is.
So,
yes.
so that only becomes real to us because we know what a giraffe looks like.
That's right. Yes, but it's not just we know what a giraffe looks like. They have the concept there as well. It's not just what a giraffe.
It only comes from a learned experience.
It comes from, certainly so. It comes from a learned experience. This is when, for example, when you come to try to understand scientific work. Well, I'll come on to this at the end, because actually it follows the same pattern. And the reason why scientific work is difficult is it actually fits this breakdown situation. Because in scientific work you have part of it, and you don't have what's the organising idea. And the discovery, as I'll show later, is when the organising idea comes. And then, in fact, there can be quite new things, and new concepts are developed. Now, some people, of course, think that it's not so, but people who actually experience this, that there really are new concepts, new ideas. And that is how things things develop. I'm going to come back to that at the end, if I may, because I don't want to lose my very, very tenuous thread, but if I do, I've had it. There are many other lovely examples of this, which you can do for yourself. I must watch the time. To save me drawing it up, that cube is very interesting, as is the duck and the rabbit. If you look at that cube, you can see it in two ways. You can see it so this is the front, or you can see it so that is the front. You can turn that cube inside out. And if you do that, it's called gestalt switching. If you sit and do that, then you will actually have the experience that you are making that happen. And when it happens, you see it there. You see it change there. But at the same time, because you're actually doing it, you can recognize that it is you who are doing it. It's like switching on a light. You switch on one light, switch it off, switch on another light, switch it off. And it's actually all happening in the mind. Let's not worry about where the mind is. It's all happening in the mind. But at first it seems as if it's happening out there. But it actually is happening in the mind, and you can catch it here. This is why these things are useful. Similarly with the duck rabbit, my version, the Gestalt psychology version used by Wittgenstein. Here you've got a figure which is a rabbit looking that way with its ears back, very perky looking rabbit. And here you've got a duck.
Ah, right, I couldn't see the rabbit.
Yeah, well mine's better for that. I think mine's better for Wittgenstein.
I saw the duck, but I couldn't see the rabbit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you are. This is called, naturally enough, the duck rabbit. Now, I like to imagine, let's go back to Jed's experiment this time. This half of the room can only see the duck. This half of the room can only see the rabbit. Where both halves of the room are actually looking at the same thing, having the same visual experience. Both halves of the room are having the same sense perception. But the cognitive perception is entirely different. You're seeing a duck, you're seeing a rabbit. And we could have an argument about this, you know?
Yeah.
People do. People argue about exactly this kind of thing, and it can produce wars and so on, and does. So this is a very good kind of thing for actually showing this. And you can say, well, let's settle the argument. You draw what you see, and then we'll see. So you draw a duck and show it to them and then say, you've drawn a rabbit. You cannot draw what you see, but you can see it. And that's what makes art possible. Because without that, there could be no art. You can never draw what you see, but you can see it. Now the importance of this is, as I said, this is actually happening all the time in our lives, every moment of the day that we're awake. These kind of concepts. This is actually our experience. So we're living in this dimension of mind. We've actually got a higher kind of awareness without our even being aware of it. That's nice, isn't it? Everyone's searching for higher awareness and we had it already. Yes, it's just that we didn't recognise it. And this brings it out. This is what concepts are like. This is what seeing is like. I was thinking that there are a number of other instances of this. You know, at the beginning of this century, I think it was, at the end of the last century, people discovered, going back to vision, that there were people who were born congenitally blind. And among those people, there were some who were not blind for physiological reasons. They were actually blind because they'd been born with cataracts in their eyes, and therefore they were blind for mechanical reasons. And with the development of surgery, eventually it became possible to operate on people and remove the cataracts so they could see. And what people expected was something like this, that when the bandages were removed, people would have this wonderful experience of seeing the world. And nothing like that happened whatsoever. It was a horrific experience, because when the bandages were removed, they were blinded by this mass of swirling light and colour in movement, which is intensely painful. And they could see nothing of what we see at all. They had, in fact, just got visual experience and no more. And it was all moving, because, you know, I move my head like that. As a child, we all as children, when we're doing things, all that we do as children actually sets up patterns in the brain which stabilise, because we are born, as you know, incompletely formed. And the early days of life are all to do, and actually all through life as a matter of fact, are to do with developing a number of things, and one of them, continually developing, have the possibility of continually developing the brain in different modes. And as children, that by our moving about, it actually, I'm trying to avoid the word program because I hate the computer model, but it actually forms the brain in various ways. So when I move my head, the world doesn't move. But when these people had these bandages off, that hadn't been formed in them. So when they moved their head, it was just, since you can't help moving your head all the time, then everything was just in movement. And they just wanted the bandages back and to be blind again. And they put a triangle in front of them and say, what's that? And they could not see it. But if they closed their eyes and touched it, they could say triangle. So they had to learn to see with the eyes in this kind of way. And this awoke people up to this kind of thing we're talking about. And they began to say, hang on, isn't this the kind of thing that philosophers were talking about? And we thought was very abstract and didn't mean anything, because there it was actually happening directly. So, and you can also find there are anaesthetics that do this kind of thing, anaesthetics that don't put you to sleep, that you think you've been to sleep, and they affect it in this way. And you can actually, if you just catch it, you can catch all of this actually happening as it changes. But this is therefore something which is obviously important to us in many, many ways. For example, let's consider a person who suffers from intense feelings of suspicion. That people in the world, paranoia, people in the world are behaving suspiciously. Anyone, I don't know anything about this kind of thing, but people do tell me these things, so I repeat it. But apparently, with people who are like that, you cannot actually get them to see this because they've got a rational system that actually justifies their suspicion. Why is it justified? Because they can see people behaving suspiciously. Their problem is that of the double-seeing son, whose father said to him, son, you see two instead of one. How can that be, said the boy. Well, if it were, I would see 4 moons up there instead of 2. That's the problem of paranoia and suspicion. They have to come to experience, in this particular case, what is a distorted mode of seeing. And you can actually see this, and you can see this happening at the national level. You can study history in this phenomenological way. You can actually see the way in which, for example, at certain times in history, a different group of people actually constitute themselves by a new organising idea of who they are. This is what the Germans did after the Treaty of Versailles in 1918, and they constituted themselves as a nation in a crisis, which reflected a world crisis. Historians have studied this. If you go through, you will actually see the German nation constituting itself in a certain mode, in which it's then called upon to have a higher destiny to transform not only the Western world, but the whole world, and to bring it through to a new dispensation of being, which will last for 1,000 years, and will be a spiritual revolution. And you can follow all this stuff in the writing of the Germans from 1918 onwards, and you can see this organising idea, organising the German nation into such a form that we end up with, you know, the consequences, and so on. And there are and then people look at that and say, hey, but hang on a minute. We don't see Germany as being in a spiritual crisis. We don't see it that way. What we see is economic difficulties brought about by an extremely vicious treaty against them after the First World War. But we don't actually see this cultural crisis that they see, which goes to the very root of the German being. And all of this has been documented by historians. And what you've got there is a massively acting, organising idea, which is perceived by them as being evidently what is the case, because you can see from all the facts that this is what is the case. So this kind of thing, I'm only throwing out these examples just randomly to show that what I'm talking about actually, because it's concerned with the process of cognitive perception of how we see the world, actually operates at every level we go to. So it's not just a simple thing. You can take any level you like and you'll find the same basic structure here. There will be something equivalent to the sense perception and something equivalent to the organising idea, and these will be fused together. So it's all thought to be coming directly from the sensory part alone. And that, in scientific terms, is the mistake made by the philosophy of empiricism, which I'll finish up with. What time do I finish? Oh, we'll have some questions. I'll finish in a couple of minutes.
10 minutes.
Yeah, okay. Philosophy of interest. I want to talk now about science. Because what I'm talking about here operates through science at every level, from the simplest to the most complex. And if you can see if you can see science in the light of the process of cognitive perception, then you understand what science is. And most importantly, you understand what it isn't. Consequently, outrageous claims made on its behalf by some scientists can be seen, phenomenologically, to be completely bogus, without rejecting the science. That's rather important. Let's go to, you see, it has, as was the question earlier, it has this quality in science. In scientific discovery, you are actually living in that process of not knowing. You are involved with something and you not know it. You do not know what it is. And you're working towards it. And it may involve many people, not just you. And sometimes the what it is only emerges very clearly later on, and people had it without knowing it, and so on. Some simple examples. Let's go to Galileo's discoveries with the telescope, because they are very famous. 1610, Galileo published a book in which he talked about the discoveries in the heavens, the new picture of the heavens that he had discovered with the telescope which he had made. So he makes a report about his long observations on the surface of the moon, which he announces is not in fact as smooth and perfect as people had thought, but in fact has got mountains on it and valleys in it. Later we call them craters, but he called them valleys. And that he has seen these with his telescope. Goody, says everybody, let's have a look down that telescope. And of course they see nothing of the kind whatsoever. Nothing. He then announces that he has found 4 planets circulating around the planet Jupiter with his telescope, which we now call moons. And this is a very, very exciting discovery. And people today think that at the time people didn't want to know and didn't want to see it. They did want to see it. The problem was they couldn't see it. And there are many reasons why they couldn't see it. One of them was that Galileo's telescope was so bad. One modern commentator has said it's a miracle that Galileo could see Jupiter with the telescope, let alone Jupiter's moons. But actually, one of the very interesting things about the whole historical development of science, if you study this, is you find how time and again and again and again people have actually done what wasn't possible. And that takes it on, and then it becomes possible for others. Can you hold on a minute? So what actually happens, and he writes about this in detail, he talks about these mountains on the moon, and he says, well, and the valleys, and he says, well, what I noticed was that when I looked at the surface of the moon, I saw the usual spots on the moon, which he called the large or ancient spots. And those are the ones you would see with the naked eye. And then, he says, I saw numerous other spots on the moon which have never been seen by anyone since the creation of the world before me. This is very typical of Galileo. He always likes to get himself centre stage. And he would talk about, oh, I don't need that, I've got this thing here. Technology comes to my aid. Yeah, this makes life easier. What you see, there we go. What you see, he says, you have a dark spot there with a bright ring on the edge. And he noticed that as time passed, that bright ring filled in until the whole thing was bright. And he doesn't know what this is. And eventually he comes to this. He said, you know, if you have a valley on the earth, then in the early morning the sun will be shining so close to the horizon, just that side of the valley will be illuminated. So if you were to look down upon it, you would see a ring of light there and the rest would be black. And as the sun rises, so more and more of the valley will become filled with light. And that's exactly what we're seeing on the moon. So we're seeing mountains, we're seeing craters, valleys on the moon. And there's a whole process here. It has to come to the concept. And I mean, it is very. I won't go into the mountain bit, but with the moons, it's really very interesting because he tells you he's January 1610 the 7th. He looks at Jupiter and he sees and he puts it. I saw 3 starlets close to Jupiter in a line. I thought nothing of it, he said. The next day, January 8th, he said, I saw the same 3 starlets close to Jupiter, and as I said before, I thought nothing of it. But he said, I noticed this time that now they were all to one side of Jupiter, and I thought, goodness me, that must surely mean that Jupiter is not moving in the way in which the astronomical tables say it should be at the moment, and it's actually moving in the opposite direction to the one we expect. And he goes on, next day it's cloudy, and then it goes on, 10th there's 2, and they'll move about a bit, then there's 2 and 1, and then on the 13th there's an extra one. And he goes on, day after day after day on this. And only eventually, and he says, what's he says? Oh yes, he said, I thought there were 3 stars, just happened to be lined up with Jupiter then, no significance whatsoever. Then he thought Jupiter was moving the wrong way. Eventually, he comes to the new idea, which organises his experience into seeing the moons of Jupiter. So he then seed the moons of Jupiter. He seeded, right, like the giraffe. That he could then see it. So someone else looks down the telescope and they can't see it at all, because they don't really have the idea in the way in which he does. Because all the work that he's done with the papers, anyway, the telescope's lousy anyway. So this is the way in which quite simple discoveries actually show us this process of cognitive perception. And a lovely one is the discovery of the planet Uranus by Herschel, the first planet to be discovered other than those known in the ancient world, or in the 18th century. And Herschel built a much better telescope than other people with his own hands, a very good one. And he studied the heavens, and he studied a particular part of the sky where we now know the planet Uranus to have been. And he noticed the star there had a disc shape. Now everyone knows that stars don't have disc shapes in telescopes, so it couldn't be a star. And he found that it was moving slightly, so he studied that. And he concluded, he said, I've got it, I see what it is a comet. I have discovered a new comet. And he published this, Herschel's comet. And then what happens in this work, it's very cooperative, lots of people were checking all the measurements and doing their own measurements because then became an object of interest. And over a period of time, it began to be noticed that the way in which it moved did not actually fit the movement of a comet, the movement which would be expected of a comet. Then it became an anomaly. So what had been seen as a comet suddenly became an anomaly. And then one man called Lexell saw that it was a planet. And it wasn't discovered, you see, by Herschel at all. It was discovered by Lexell, whose nobody's ever heard of until today, shouldn't we?
Yes.
You know? Because he seed the planet. He saw the planet. It was through Lexell that the organising idea of the sensory experience as planet came about. And then people said, Herschel discovered a planet. He discovered a comet. And this is simply because, you see, it's then thought, it was all done by just looking down the telescope. So it goes on all the way through to this kind of process. And in science, of course, it then takes, these are very simple discoveries. But it does show us that the idea from the very beginning that we make scientific discoveries simply by means of sense experience, and you can trust science because it's based on the experience of the senses. It isn't. It is, but it isn't. It's based on the experience of the senses, but if it was only that, there would be no science at all, because there would be no cognitive perception, there would be no knowledge. So even the most simple, apparently sensory observations turn out to be actually much subtler than that. And this comes all the way up to higher and higher levels, where you get organising ideas which act on a very, very high level indeed, organising a huge amount of information and data on different levels. These are the great organising theories of science, which, contrary to what people suppose, are not actually discovered by investigation, but are usually introduced into science as organising ideas usually from the cultural historical context, as in the Renaissance. The idea that the sun must be in the centre was introduced from Neoplatonism. It was never discovered. The evidence for the earth moving, for example, didn't become available until 400 years later anyway, by which time everyone believed in it. But the idea that the sun must be in the centre was introduced from the philosophy of Neoplatonism, because the sun was the representative of God. Where else can you put God's representative but in the centre? And this was in Copernicus' thinking, very, very clearly. We don't have time to do this, but I have all the extracts from Copernicus in which he actually says this quite explicitly. It's a wonderful thing the way that historians of science have now completely transformed our understanding of what science is. That's the wonderful thing. The not so wonderful thing is the way that nobody knows this, which is a great shame, because it really would help us to understand things in a much better way. The whole, I mean, they did that there, and the whole way of looking for mathematical relationships. Time and again, you see, if you look at Copernicus, Galileo and others, they say, do not trust what the senses tell you. Do not trust your senses. This is good. Act 1, Scene 1 of modern science, first move, don't trust the senses. Go and ask any science teacher, you'll say, science began when people trusted their senses. Copernicus says you can't trust your senses because what they tell you is an illusion. The reality is hidden behind the senses and is to be found in simple mathematical, geometrical and arithmetical relationships. Find those, they are the harmony of the world. The harmony of the world is mathematical. And he looks for harmony in the world with the sun and the planets in the same way that the Renaissance painters, sculptors and architects look for harmony in painting, sculpture and in buildings. And in fact, when you read him, you actually think you're reading Palladio and architecture. And I can't do this because we haven't got time, but I've got quotations which are almost one for one from Copernicus to Palladio. And what Palladio was doing in architecture, Copernicus said he's doing with the architecture of the universe. And he arranges it so the whole thing has the form of a temple, as you know, Palladio was very much concerned with the forms of temples. And he shows how, doing it his way, he can show that the mathematics of the sun and the planets is such that the whole thing has the proportions of a temple with God's representative at the centre. And this is where it comes from. And everyone thinks this just comes from simple investigations, sensory discoveries and so on. And this goes all the way through science from then onwards. So you have an organising idea. This is called the historicity of scientific knowledge. That is, that scientific knowledge is not self-founding. It's not discovered by science, it's introduced into science from the cultural historical context. And of course, that doesn't mean it's a fraud or anything like that. This just means that science doesn't work in the way in which he thought it did. This is the organising idea which is brought in. And what really you have with Copernicus is he takes the same data that the ancient astronomers had, that Ptolemy had, he even uses the same measurements that Ptolemy used, and he changes it from a duck to a rabbit. And that's what he does. But for, obviously, that's putting it rather simply. And then, just to finish off, the really key thing here is that this introduces the idea that reality is not discovered through the senses. You need the sensory part, but the reality is to be found in the mathematics, which is hidden behind. I won't go into all that. But that then develops into the whole of modern science with its mathematical foundation. The English-speaking people tend to think that science was empirical. The study of the history of science shows that it was anti-empirical. It actually developed, particularly through this mathematical ideal, that we should look for the mathematical relationships. And people began to feel that this was what was very real, because they had immediately identified this with the thinking of God. The Platonic forms, which is said is God thinking the world. So God is actually thinking these mathematical relationships. And therefore, when you were doing mathematical physics, you were actually investigating the direct manifestation of God in the world. And this is all, if you want to know about this, now there is a book accessible here by Margaret Wertheim called Pythagoras' Trousers, which is actually God, Physics and the Gender Wars. And it's a superb book. She's really done her homework and we should all be thankful to her. You know the book?
Yeah.
You know the book. It's good, isn't it? It's just incredible what she has collected together in readable form between one pair of covers what is disseminated all over the place in the new developments in the history of science. Strongly recommend that book to anybody. So then we come to this idea, you see, that I'm finishing off now, which I may not look like it, but I am. Physical science, physics, which is mathematical, is fundamental. It discovers the ultimate reality. And this idea has grown gradually from this, because these mathematical laws of God's thinking, can't get more ultimate than that, can you? And that's built in from the beginning. And this idea grows that physics, in this mathematical way, that's its organising idea, because the organising idea is that science shall be done mathematically, that finds the ultimate reality, the real basis upon which everything else is built. But when you study it phenomenologically, you see that this is simply an organising idea which has been brought in from a particular cultural and historical context and leads to an incredible scientific development. But there is nothing in that which says it's giving you the ultimate reality. Because nature and reality can manifest in quite different ways other than the mathematical. All that this does is it allows nature to manifest in its mathematical aspect, like the duck. So it allows nature, it's really just, imagine nature, I mean not a duck rabbit, but a figure which could become a multi-perspectival figure. Not just two, duck rabbit, but many possibilities. Now think of nature like that, and also as not being static, but as being dynamical. Then one of those ways that nature can manifest is in the mathematical way, that's like the duck. You wouldn't look at the duck, would you, and say in that picture, the duck is the foundation of the rabbit. No one would do that. You wouldn't say that the duck is superior to the rabbit, or you only understand the rabbit in terms of the duck. But this is actually what we do in science today all the time. And we say physics is fundamental, it has reached the ultimate reality, everything must be understood in terms of physics, so what doesn't fit physics isn't real. And what I'm trying to show you is if you follow through the phenomenology of knowledge, you'll see that without rejecting anything in physics whatsoever, all you're doing is bring about a bit of a readjustment. You're just showing, no, this is true, physics is true. But it's only one way that reality can manifest. It's only one way that nature can manifest. And there could be other completely different ways in which nature can manifest, which in their own terms would be real. But there is no manifestation which is ultimate. There is none which is in a certain sense more fundamental or foundational than the others, so that the others could be thought to somehow depend upon it. Which is the picture we have now built in the Western world. We got it right. We got it right. Okay? We're the ones. Lucky us. And it's all based on the kind of science that developed in the last 300 years. That's the key to reality. It isn't. But you can say that without denying it or saying that it's not true, because physics is as true can be. But it's no truer than other things can also be, which are quite different. And this is to me, the tremendous liberation which comes out of this phenomenological approach. And I know I've rushed this through at the end, I just wanted to get a taste of it. If you follow this all the way through, you end up being liberated from modern Western science without having to imply at all that there's anything wrong with modern Western science, which I think is really quite something. And I think many of us here would be very interested to follow through that point of view, because it means we've got a much better basis on which to understand the possibility of alternative realities and how they link with our world, simply by putting our world more into perspective. It's got a bit out of joint. It's up there, but put it back along with the rest. That's the idea. So this phenomenology of perception, all I've done is I've followed through the simple story of perception until you become right up to a really quite comprehensive cultural historical level. But the fundamental structure is the same. There's always something equivalent to the sensory, which is organised by an idea. And we make the mistake of thinking that that idea was discovered out there in the world by the senses. We get it back to front. We try to get to the milk by way of the cheese. And I'll end up there.
Right.
Thanks very much. Well, there's room for lots of questions. There will be a session at the end of the day, which is an open session, where we can maybe explore where we started off going to, or went somewhere else.